on one rickshaw and he got on the other one, and we were competing to see who would get to the house first. So we were like egging on the drivers, like, come on, you can do this. I was like, I need to meet my dad. And my dad's like, I need to meet my daughter. And the drivers are super excited and having a good time. And I obviously won. And I'd like to think it was my motivational skills, but it could have been the extra cash I gave him. But yeah, so I'm really excited. This looking at it is making me very excited to be here.
Thank you for sharing that. And you know what? Your excitement is joined by people in the chat. I see a few things. Design Without Borders, welcome. We're going to keep moving. I know there have been some technical difficulties, so we are going to do our best to make sure everyone has a good audio experience today. Let me share more about Nusrat. Besides her excitement over that rickshaw, you also bring a tremendous amount of expertise to this conversation today. So Nusrat is an experienced designer here at IDEO U. You have a background in anthropology, and you are currently, I understand, studying cognitive science at Columbia, based in New York. We got that already. You have a professional background in finance, UX, entrepreneurship, and a fun fact for some of you out there as well, she is a lover of Swedish fish and cherry Coke. But one of the reasons we brought you on today is to join us in a conversation about inclusive mindsets. And so today we're going to talk about this module that we created for IDEO U and what prompted it, how we arrived at these. We're going to share 4 mindsets, but most importantly, Nusrat and I are going to workshop 2 of these mindsets with you. So all of us can start to bring more of this into our practice. Our hope today is that you'll be able to take this work and apply it in your own world to maybe shift a bit more towards inclusive mindsets in your work, in your community. So let's get into this. Before we begin, Nusrat, I think it's helpful to it sounds like, let's set some agreements to help give context and set space for this conversation.
Definitely. That is super important. So first, this is a work in progress. So let's just remember to have grace with ourselves and with each other. I do want to acknowledge that at IDEO U, we still have a lot to learn about inclusion and design, especially from our global community of learners. Second, these mindsets take a lifetime to develop, and we never really get there. So, let's just take this time together to be imperfect together. Third, we're going to assume the best intentions behind a person's words and actions, but at the same time, definitely hold each other accountable because these words and actions can cause harm. And finally, let's just respect everyone's confidentiality on anything shared today.
Thank you for sharing that. We have some responses already, like, yes, we got that right. It's a work in progress, and talking about it and practicing is how we all keep making impact. So I do want to acknowledge too, the topics we're going to discuss can bring up a whole range of emotions. And so I want to acknowledge that and make space for that feeling. Like we already have some folks sharing some. Let's start with a small reflection moment. Connect with yourself in this moment and answer this question for yourself. If you're comfortable, I'd love for you to share it in the chat. When you think of being more inclusive in your behaviors, what feelings or thoughts come up for you? And I would love it if people are comfortable to share. And Nusrat, why don't you and I also share? I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, go for it.
So conviction is definitely a word that comes up for me because I believe so strongly that when people feel a sense of belonging, they can bring their full self to their work, to their community, to their relationships. So that's one. I also admit I feel somewhat cautious for fear of causing harm. So I'd love to hear what it means for you, Nusrat, and let's share some of what others are sharing.
Yeah, I feel like open-mindedness. I want to know everything. I just want to have that knowledge and be wise with it. I can also feel somewhat sensitive. I never want to hurt anyone. But I also feel firm. I feel strong. I want to be an advocate. So I want to do whatever I can to help.
Well spoken. There's some great words. I don't know if you're seeing these too. So there's a lot of empathy, beautiful. Trust, tender support. So I just want to, vulnerability. Thank you everyone for sharing that and being so open. Let's keep that energy as we move into this conversation. So Nusrat, why don't we dive in, and what do we mean by inclusive mindsets?
Yeah, so we often describe the design process as nonlinear, which means that there's many ways to practice it. And but one thing design is not is that it's not neutral. You don't carry a neutral perspective when you're designing with and for others. You're bringing a lifetime of personal experiences and biases, which is human nature, that affect how you see the world. So biases in this context are attitudes towards groups of people that disproportionately favor them. It can lead to prejudices, it can lead to exclusion, and even harm others, right? So for example, it's very common in the US for work teams to host like an after work cocktail event for team building. And that could be great for those who are a certain age and who can drink, but it can exclude those who don't drink for health reasons or religious reasons, exclude parents because they have to find after work childcare. So people make these kinds of design choices every single day. And we can definitely be so much more responsible and inclusive in doing so. So as we're growing in our personal design, our personal practice of design thinking, it's so important to develop inclusive mindsets, to really understand your own perspective, the perspective of others, and how they influence collaboration in design. So the way I like to think of it is that inclusivity happens when we design solutions that consider people of all backgrounds, and mindsets are the ways in which we approach people. So our posture, our expectations, and the attitudes that we hold towards them. So we are going to go through a few terms in today's session. So Ko, I want to ask, as someone who worked on this module, if you can give us some definitions of the terms we're going to be using today. Two of them that come to mind are designer and collaborators.
Yeah. So we'll be using these throughout. And so in our course, it's in a design course. So the word designer makes sense in that context. But here it might feel very exclusionary to folks because you might not identify as a designer. But like, I love the example you gave of like the after work team building. We mean the word designer to be broad for anyone who plays a role in doing work or making decisions or creating choices around problems and change. So it's intentionally meant to be broad, so it's accessible to a variety of contexts. So it could be, you might be a project leader at work. You might be a member on a school PTA board. You might play a decision maker or an influencer role at work or in your community. So we mean this to be broad for anyone who plays an active role in doing the work or creating change in service of and with others. So mean it broad. And then we also use the word collaborators a lot. This is meant to describe the people for whom we are designing with and for. So other terms folks might use are users or customers, community members, participants, or even stakeholders. So we'll keep coming back to that. But the point is, we would hope it would be relevant to anyone listening today. You can practice and bring this inclusive mindsets into all parts of how you think and act in your work and communities. So that's the invitation.
Thank you so much. And how about like the background of why this learning experience was designed?
Yeah. So at IDEO U, we believe in active practice. You can't, Nusrat, as much as I would love to just listen to you share with me how to think about these things, I have to practice it for myself. I can't. And so we were getting feedback from our learners across the communities that they were asking for more active support on the how of inclusive design and inclusive mindsets. So there are many ways to approach this, but one tool we wanted to offer was an approach that was broadly accessible. So across a variety of contexts and audiences, hence mindsets. So Nusrat, you already talked about this, but mindsets are really useful here because they directly influence your actions. So as anyone starts to improve their practice or be mindful of their practice, mindsets are a great place to start because it directly influences how you understand the people around you, how you tune into the bias you may bring in its context, and how you might shift your behaviors and actions to be more inclusive. I will say, by no means is this a comprehensive solution. This alone is not going to to make all parts of your choices inclusive. It is one tool. It is a really great tool, I think, as a place to start and to keep returning to in other meeting mindsets. So let's get into it and start to practice it. Yeah, I want to hand it back over to you, Nusrat, and maybe what is can you give us an overview? So we're talking about 4 mindsets. We're going to go into 2. Can you give us an overview of what they are?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that background on the why. It's so important for all of us to develop a personal why and develop that intrinsic motivation for this very important work. I just want to call out Karen Stephenson. She brought up head plus heart plus hand. And I just love that. It's very simple and sweet and covers a lot of it. And then Kisa Johnson is giving some great just insights and feedback, but she's just putting it to host and panelists. So Kisa, put it to everyone so everyone can see how awesome your thoughts are. So I want to say that I just want to start off saying that there was a lot of people beyond myself that were involved in making this module and its content, a diverse cross-section of people, and it was very much a team effort. And I really don't want their contributions to go unrecognized. So kudos to the team. Inclusive mindsets are so important to practice in moments of collaboration. And without them, you're going to have biases, and it can lead to limited insights and incorrect solutions. They can even cause harm, perpetuate inequalities, reinforce institutional biases. And we're going to go into some examples to make this a bit more tangible. But let's start off with 4 of the inclusive design mindsets the IDEO has identified. And then we're going to dig deeper onto 2 of them. So the first is the collaborative relationship builder. And this is the designer who intentionally creates a situation where stakeholders are treated as peer collaborators. Then you have the informed partner. And this is the designer who does their research on a stakeholder's context prior to interacting with them. Then you have the curious researcher. This is a designer who is open to and curious about the lived experiences of the design stakeholders. And then you have the conscientious advocate. And this is the designer who's always actively looking for opportunities to balance power and remove barriers that prevent fair participation.
So I should say too, I realize we were also using the word stakeholders there. Again, we mean that to be more broad. Collaborators. It could be your customers. It could be consumers. It could be internal stakeholders. It's all the people with whom you are collaborating. So let's look at 2 of the mindsets. And we don't have time, I'm sorry, to cover all 4 today, but we want to dive deeply into 2 of them so we might actually practice them together. They come from the full module, comes from our courses on our foundations in design thinking, which includes insights for innovation and from ideas to action. So let's dive in. The first one I want to talk about, Nusrat, is the collaborative relationship builder. So tell me a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so with this mindset, the designer creates a situation where the collaborators are treated as peers. So they're treated like any other important collaborator. They're compensated for their time. They're asked for permission to share their stories, and they're considered an equal participant in that relationship. So here the designer really understands that the collaborators are experts in their own lived experiences. Now, what does the collaborative relationship builder mindset not look like? We call what not to do the shadow mindset. So here the collaborative relationship builder's shadow mindset is the extractive visitor. So in the shadow mindset, the designer does not give collaborators enough context for the project. They don't even orient them to their role in the design process. They just extract information from them, and they don't follow up with them on how their insights have informed the project. So the designer develops a negative reputation among the collaborators. So we're going to hear from one of our teammates at IDEO U, and it's a personal story about a time that they realized the harm being done in not adopting the collaborative relationship builder mindset. And we've anonymized all personal stories to just protect people's privacy.
So we'll give it a minute. We're going to queue up an audio clip. And there's some, while we're queuing that up, there's some great comments too of just people even seeing, here's how I might use it in my systems work, or stakeholders, thinking of them as having a place at the table. Love that thinking.
In a previous life, I would conduct lots of focus groups and market research studies where participants were viewed as subjects, a target population we were trying to seek feedback from or get their opinions or reactions to a product, service, idea. They were usually compensated, but we rarely, and sometimes intentionally, left out the context or the project background, and we definitely didn't follow up once the session was over. Even after I transitioned into content development and was engaging in more design research, I would still frequently meet with various stakeholders in order to better understand needs, wants, goals, objectives, obstacles, challenges, motivations, etc., yet didn't truly view them as equal collaborators. Looking back now, it feels super cringy how extractive that experience must have been for folks where I clearly wanted to get something from them but didn't offer anything of true value in return. It was not a mutual exchange. I see that now. I don't know if it ever got so bad as to result in a negative reputation, but I'm sure the people who attended those sessions didn't feel like I was building a relationship with them.
One thing that I loved that she mentioned was that, it was not a mutual exchange, which means that, in a collaborative relationship builder mindset, it is so important to view the collaborators as equal participants in a mutually beneficial relationship. So emphasis on mutual beneficial. So you might be wondering, like, how do I even begin practicing this mindset? Maybe it feels a little overwhelming. It could be it is a great idea, but like, where do I start? So some questions you can ask yourself to check if you're living in this mindset or more of the shadow side. So one question I would ask is, if the roles were reversed, how would I feel about this interaction? And two, how am I measuring stakeholders' the collaborators' satisfaction with this engagement? And three, how am I compensating them for their time and effort? So you're going to know if you've successfully adopted this mindset, if you feel like, all the people involved in the project have formed authentic interpersonal relationships, that the insights uncovered and the solutions that were developed make sense for the context. And then whatever interventions that came about, they remain relevant for a long time past the end of the official project.
Nusrat, you are doing an amazing job of sharing this with us and bringing us in. Thank you. And so let's take a moment to practice this and kind of think about how we might, I'm going to think about it for myself and everyone joining us today, how you might apply this. Like, when might you practice this? So think of I find it helpful to think of a moment when you could practice it. Think of a moment when some folks are recognizing it, when it's not reciprocal, when it feels cringy. So tune into some of those things in your work, in your community, and then think about, so how might you practice this mindset in that moment? I would love to hear from, if you're comfortable sharing in the chat, how does this apply in your world? What might you say or do different with this mindset? Nusrat, you and I can share a couple examples. I'm happy to go first unless you want to.
Yeah, I can go. So one thing I do to channel my inner collaborative relationship builder mindset, I like to put time in the calendar to connect with junior team members. I'm a junior team member myself, but if I would definitely want to make sure that anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak up, that they have another communication channel, or I follow up with them in some way to get their insights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also, one thing I do is, after I've engaged with my collaborator, take time to go back to that person and present my findings to them so they see their impact.
I love that one. That's one I think about as well. There's things like you could do what's called an impact postcard, where it can be like, sometimes it might be down the road. I think those can be even more impactful if it's a few while afterwards where you connect the dots from that individual's contribution or part in it to connecting the dots to what impact it had. I definitely think about the ratio of relationship moments and kind of work moments. I think there's often, when you're work context, there's this pressure to make everything about productivity and work. And so being intentional about curiosity for the relationship and care for the relationship is one I think about. We have some others. I see. I'm not going to call out names for confidentiality, but I just want to acknowledge the range of things people are talking about. So someone acknowledging within even a family moment how they are thinking differently about that. There's a good. I will call it. Lucy has an example of Dr. Alba Villa. Pardon my pronunciation. Villamil's ethical researchers checklist. Thank you for sharing that. You're right. You're already +1 to you're ahead of it. What else are you seeing that you want to pull out here?
Yeah, I liked Monica when she said, make sure all the voices in the room are heard and do not move unless that is done.
Actually, that tees us up well for the next mindset. And I want to acknowledge other folks are recognizing this too. There are often times when there's a disconnect or disproportionality between who's making decisions and who's in the room. So let's talk about this one, which we call the conscientious advocate. Let's move on to our next mindset.
Yeah, so with this mindset, the designer looks for opportunities to balance power and remove barriers that prevent fair participation. So we define power here as the ability to influence other people and situations. So the designer here, they identify when some collaborators have power over others, as well as when there are unequal dynamics that can cause harm. And they do whatever they can to bring in those who are left out. We call the shadow mindset here the complacent bystander. And in the shadow mindset, the designer just accepts the way things are, even if there are unequal power dynamics between the collaborators. And this perpetuates existing dysfunctions that ironically, it created the very problems that they wanted to solve. And a lot, they don't realize that they're actually further entrenching inequality through their complacent design. So we're going to hear from one of our teammates at IDEO U with another personal story about a time that they realized the harm being done when the conscientious advocate mindset was not adopted. And again, this story is anonymized to protect people's privacy.
In a former job, I shared a desk with a colleague and friend. Multiple times a week, the vice president, someone with a huge amount of power in the company, would come by our desks and say something as she walked out the door at the end of the day. Many of these times, she would comment on my colleague's physical appearance. They intended to come across as compliments, but each and every time my colleague did something ever so slightly different with her appearance, such as a slightly different hairstyle, the VP singled her out and made a point about it. Every single time this happened, I watched how my colleague brushed it off as a compliment to this person's face, but then had a really different reaction once she left. Some days she got angry, some days she brushed it off with a joke, but she always said something under her breath or directly to me that showed me it made her feel uncomfortable. I repeatedly did not intervene. I repeatedly saw the negative impact it was having on my colleague and friend, and I repeatedly was quiet when the VP would engage with her. I accepted that because this person had far more power than me in the company, that I couldn't use my voice and instead had to watch my colleagues suffer. Upon reflection, if I am to be in that situation again, I would approach it very differently, with a conscientious advocate mindset instead. In the moments when the VP talked to my colleague, I could have spoken up and hinted at a need for reflection. I could have talked to someone else in the company with more power than me to deliver the feedback that the comments were making my colleague uncomfortable. There are a lot of things I could have done differently.
I just want to take a moment. I just want to take a moment to let that sink in. The line that resonated with me so deeply was, there are a lot of things I could have done differently. And that is the point of this conversation that we're having here today. So some questions that you can ask yourself if you're living in this inclusive mindset or more of the shadow side. One is, would one collaborator or group act differently if another collaborator or group wasn't here? And then what does that tell us about the power structures happening at play? And then a deep question is, how do I impact these power structures? And now how can I work to offset differences in power? And then another question to ask is like, does every collaborator have a fair opportunity to speak, vote, and listen? You can know if you've successfully adopted this conscientious advocate mindset if one, as a designer, you understand power differences and how they impact the lives of people in the system. And then when the designer develops design solutions that help break down unequal systems of power or center those with less power.
This is so powerful. So let's take a moment to think about, again, how to make it tangible in your context and how you might start to practice. Same thing. If you're comfortable in the audience, we encourage you to share in the chat. What is something you can do to practice the conscientious advocate mindset? Same thing. I think it's helpful to think of particular moments, especially if there is that moment where you're like, oh, I could have, or I should have, is a good indicator. Same thing. So Nusrat, if you're comfortable, let's share a couple of ways that you and I practice this. I'm happy to go first, unless you want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Co.
Well, I'll openly acknowledge. So I often occupy a position of power in my organization. So I feel so my words can weigh heavy. So I have to be so I try to practice being very mindful of what a lot of people have said already in the chat: voices, the ratio of which I'm speaking, the ratio at which other voices are speaking. I'm also think a lot about invitations. When do I need to step back and actually invite folks in? How can I use my position of privilege to do that? Is one thing I think about. I also, again, I'm comfortable doing this. I will call in male colleagues for gendered comments. Would they say that to another male? Is something I will do. Nusrat, what are some ways that you practice this?
Yeah, thank you for sharing what you would do. I would allow for some heads down time, silent time for writing, collecting thoughts, so that those who may not always share thoughts on the spot have some time to prepare. And I think I'd like schedule meetings with different group pairings to see if one collaborator or group acts differently if another groups wasn't here, or just to bring about different chemistries and test those out.
Those are great ones. I love the range we're seeing. Others, thank you for sharing. Like, some of these are just so impactful of just, I think I'm sorry, I don't see the name, but just listen and notice is a really important part of this. And that's something we can all do. I'm going to call out, someone shared, watch yourself for any tension breaking comments or jokes. That's actually a very, very good indicator of harm potentially being done. And you might be amplifying it by trying to make it into a joke. Thank you for sharing that. We have so many great things we could continue to go into. I do want to make a little space for a little bit of Q&A, but I also want to make sure we provide all of you listening today with a recap of what we've covered, and just go back to the 4 as well. Nusrat, if we do have, let's take at least one quick moment to cover the other 2 mindsets that we didn't get to today. So folks have that, and then we'll make space for a little Q&A. Yeah? Yeah,
of course. So, we didn't have, as you were saying, the time scheduled today to go over the 2 mindsets, but they are just as important. So I'm going to take a moment to briefly summarize them. And they are the informed partner and the curious researcher. So the informed partner is the designer who does their research on the collaborators' context prior to interacting with them. This doesn't look like the unprepared beginner. So that's a shadow mindset. And the unprepared beginner might feel as if they have discovered new information, when in reality, the information is only new to them. So they don't realize that they are benefiting from the labor of those who educated them. So that's not who we want to be. And then the other inclusive mindset is the curious researcher. And this is the designer who is open to and curious about the lived experiences of the design collaborators. So, as opposed to the shadow mindset, the unobservant savior, who makes assumptions about the collaborators based on their own preconceived biases. And this can lead to an incomplete understanding of people and their needs, as well as this impulse to save them through like prescribed solutions.
These are, we will make sure to, in our recap, we will provide all 4 of these. We've covered a lot of territory. We don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to at least make room for a couple questions. I also want to acknowledge, if we don't get to your question or comment, please know we appreciate you taking the time. If we get to something that is burning and you do want to make space to connect, please feel free to email us at hello@ideou.com. We believe in feedback and learning, so we appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And there's been some really impactful and thoughtful comments and questions coming up in the thread. So Nusrat, I'm gonna jump to one that kind of goes back in the conversation around this idea of context. It came up around our first mindset and providing context in research. So we had a couple questions around what to know about providing the context of when you are doing research so as not to bias the results or the information. I'm happy to take that one. Nusrat, there's one I think maybe you can take, which is, how does the shadow context relate to disabilities or other marginalized or underrepresented voices in our work? I'll take the first one, research biases. So this is a consideration. I do understand that comes up. So one practice that I take on is, you may not be able to provide the context before the research session, but then it's so important to provide it afterwards. Or at a time that it can be discussed. Sometimes there is confidentiality, like it might be a clinical trial. So there might be reasons you can't reveal everything, but you can still speak to, this is for an international drug study, or this is for, you can anonymize the industry or the specifics while still giving context to the work. So that is one way I think about that. Nusrat, do you want to speak to, how does the shadow side relate to disabilities?
Yeah, so I guess to clarify, the shadow mindset is the opposite of the inclusive mindset. So it's what you should not do. And the reason why it's so important to understand the shadow mindset too is that oftentimes knowing the opposite helps amplify what you should do. And sometimes our default could be the shadow mindset. And so it's so important to hold ourselves accountable and see what are our own biases, our own preconceived notions that influence how we go and approach the shadow mindset, right? So I think, Ko, you mentioned about marginalized communities when it comes to the shadow mindset. And it's actually the marginalized communities that are impacted the most by shadow mindset. So it's important to understand that distinction.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to open up a question that is one that I will acknowledge is a impactful one that I think all of us are still learning our way forward. And this is around power dynamics. So this is real. This is a significant part of any work in inclusion and belonging. So we have some questions around someone standing up who was publicly shamed by a leader. Questions around, how do you turn a blind eye to power structures? How do you attempt to balance power? And Nusrat, I'm happy to start with this one, and I welcome you if you want to bring in some as well. So let's first acknowledge power dynamics are real, and it is not the responsibility of those marginalized to be the ones calling them out or trying to correct. That is very much the responsibility of everyone in the room, and especially those in power. So starting your own practice of awareness, step one, and start to push yourself along that journey towards being an active and an advocate. So that's one thing. It makes it sound so simple. It's not. I acknowledge it's not, but it is an important part of one's practice. I have one technique I want to bring into the room for power dynamics when working with a lot of different groups. So it is difficult to set power dynamics within one session. So I often think about how might I design different sessions to address different power dynamics, which may mean you have to create more space. I'll give an example. We were doing a project for a school district. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of different voices and dynamics there, from the students to the administrators to underrepresented groups. And so when we were doing feedback around some different construct areas, we were very intentional around designing those feedback groups and those collaborative co-design groups to create space and we didn't blend parents and kids for obvious reasons. We didn't always blend like the administrators with the parent group, because you need to create spaces where participation can be invited. We had to take people out of the room because it would shift dynamics. So being intentional around how you set up in the first place is one of the ways by which you can not fully enable, but you can be more intentional around creating power structures where people feel safe to participate. Nusrat, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, that is such a good point, Ko, about you can't fully create a place where power dynamics are at play, but you can do your absolute best. As someone who studied anthropology in college, we learned so much about this like inside outside bias. How like a lot of times anthropologists will go into the field and do field work and study with people and think that they were in the inside now, but in reality, there was an inevitable power dynamic there because you are the observer or you are the interviewer, and you're collaborating with someone else. So I think the biggest thing for me was to first acknowledge the different types of power that you can hold. And as someone who is a person of color, as someone who does wear a headscarf, I still have power, in many ways that other people that don't. So and that work is on me. I need to do that work. I can't go and tap into a resource from somewhere else of an unmarginalized community and ask them to teach me. That is my personal journey. Like I have to figure out what are my powers when I'm in a group or when I'm in a setting. What am I adding or what am I taking away? Yeah, so that personal why, I think, and that personal like journey, it really does begin with seeking knowledge and gaining awareness.
Thank you for sharing that so vulnerably and openly, Nusrat. Well spoken. I really like the point of your personal why. That is an important one that we can all answer and should be tuning into for ourselves. We have far more questions than we can get to today, so I'm gonna have to cut us off. But the good thing is, if this is something you are interested in and want to learn more about, I do want to share. We are going to have another guest on in a future podcast. Her name is Susie Wise. She comes from the D School, and it's all around a book and a body of work around designing for belonging. And we can lean into more of these topics around how you do it, how you address biases, how you address power dynamics. So I'm going to promote that. I also do want to share, if you want to get active in practicing some of these things and helping make more inclusive design, we have our colleagues at Open IDEO are launching. I think I have a slide we'll put up. They are launching an Open Innovation Challenge. It's all around designing healthy, inclusive digital spaces. And so we welcome you to check that out at openideo.com and look for the headline, Designing for Digital Thriving. Great place to influence how some of these designs come out in the world. Nusrat, I'm going to give you the very last question, but before I do that, I also just want to share a recap of the 4 things we went over today. So Thank you for joining us. We've been talking about inclusive mindsets, which is a module that appears in our IDEO U Design Foundations and Design Thinking certificate program. Both of these courses are available and running through October. Tomorrow's the last day to enroll, so I do encourage you to check it out at ideou.com/DTCert, and you can learn more about and practice all 4 of the mindsets. Nonetheless, I am going to recap them for you as well. So today we were talking about inclusive mindsets, and that was the collaborative relationship builder, the informed partner, the curious researcher, and the conscientious advocate. And we've been talking with Nusrat Ahmed. Thank you, Nusrat, for all you have shared to help all of us think and start to tune into our mindsets so that our behaviors and actions might have more of the inclusive impact that we all seek. Nusrat, what is advice you would have given to your younger self or at an earlier stage in your career?
I just want to say thank you so much, Ko. I love you. And I also love everyone in this chat. I just feel such a connection with everyone. So thank you so much for your wonderful insights and all these questions. I want to look through this entire chat and just listen and just hear what everyone has to say. Advice I would give to my younger self. I think I would say just be a person of love. Love more, love harder, be merciful, be joyful. I was just watching a show yesterday night. I don't know if anyone here watches anime, but I was watching Demon Slayer, and there is the main character, Tanjiro. He is just so compassionate and so positive, and he's carrying a demon on his back, and he's a demon slayer, right? The demon on his back is his sister. He wants to make his sister back into a human. And there's all these other demon slayers who want to slay demons and hate them. And Tanjiro is like, wait, these demons were once human. I have compassion for them. So he's advocating for this revolution of like trying to have compassion for demons and try to understand them from, who they were when they're in the beginning. So Lydia, you need to watch season 2. Yes, I need to watch season 2 as well. But so I would have my younger self watch Demon Slayer. I would have them watch it. I would have her watch it and have her channel her inner Tanjiro. I really believe he incorporates all of the inclusive mindsets we talked about today, the conscientious advocate and the collaborative relationship builder, collaborating between demons and humans and advocating for this revolution. So yeah, just be a person of love, advocate, have something bigger than yourself, be a person with a mission and a purpose. So
well spoken. Let's end on that note. Thank you, Nusrat. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Whew.